As you see, I believe that Trump has represented a certain amount of chaos and even disorder in the world. And Taiwan has captured some of the attention in the midst of that chaos. Just this week, your president, Tsai, toured the NASA Mission Control Complex. She was the first visit by a Taiwanese president. It would have been a visit that would have been impossible for a senior leader from the People's Republic of China, which promised an immediate condemnation from Beijing, condemning it as a separatist gesture. And so a symbolic moment that defines kind of the era that we're in. It continued on the events of the week before when your president stopped over in Los Angeles, where she met with 3 California legislators, including Brad Sherman, who Clay had on the previous slide, who is a Democratic Party member who called on the U.S. to formally invite President Tsai to Washington, a move that would have been most unusual given the one China policy created by the Nixon administration in imposed in 1979 following Nixon's opening up visit to China. Nixon was already out of power by the time that happened, but nonetheless the one China policy was strongly would have prevented such an invitation. This visit and these visits indeed fit a pattern. On December 2nd of 2016, President Trump accepted a congratulatory phone call upon his election from President Tsai. The next week, Trump announced in a tweet that he was reconsidering the one China policy. Yet in his first phone call with President Xi Jinping, Trump affirmed support for the one China policy and said it would continue to be U.S. policy. There is reason to believe from essays and articles that I've read that when he accepted the call, he had no idea who President Tsai was and didn't really know what the one-child policy entailed, even though there'd been homework setting up the call. The call wasn't a random event, but he was not attentive enough to the preparation to have really been prepared for what was going to happen in that phone call. And it suggests that at the moment, at least, the Trump administration does not really have a coherent policy toward Taiwan. It is subjected to pressures to greatly warm U.S.-Taiwan relationships, but of course, he's also trying to manage the China relationship in conjunction with the DPRK negotiations and in conjunction with the unfolding trade war. Those of you who have attended to the news media just this morning know that Trump tweeted about 2 hours ago that he was advising Secretary of State Pompeo not to visit North Korea, as he had indicated that he was going to go, because he wants to put pressure on China because China was not sufficiently helpful on the North Korean trade issue. There are other factors that exist that are shaping the dynamics of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship as we speak. There is some bipartisan congressional support for a stronger pro-Taiwan policy. Unlike many other issues in foreign policy in the United States, this one does not cleave neatly between the Democrat or the Republican parties. As you note, Congressman Sherman is a Democrat. There are many Republicans that are also advocating a warming of U.S.-Taiwan relationships. But those congressmen are almost always representing districts that either have large defense contractors in their district who would benefit from further arms sales, or they're representing places with large Taiwanese populations locally. If you were to say how much congressional support overall is there for fundamentally altering that relationship, I think it would be very difficult to determine. But there are other kinds of pressures. As I mentioned, arms manufacturers lobby with much success for the sales of new weapon systems. The Taiwanese diaspora in the U.S. is more politically active, frankly, than is the PRC or even the Hong Kong diaspora, because perhaps it's more numerous than the Hong Kong diaspora and more politically aware than the Chinese diaspora. And Trump, of course, has surrounded himself with hardliners, such as National Security Advisor Bolton, Secretary of State Pompeo, and trade negotiator Peter Navarro, who sees China as perhaps America's greatest enemy. Remember also that President Trump ran for office and casts himself as a disruptor. His goal is to disrupt. His goal is to break the actual order of things, to change up how things do. The master negotiator, the great master of the deal who can redefine relationships. Trump is also at the moment, of course, locked in a trade war with the PRC, and this administration is openly seeking levers that do not have domestic political blowback. He's got tremendous domestic political blowback from agriculture interests, farmers and farm equipment manufacturers, and even trading companies, international global trade companies, such as Archer Daniels, Midland, and companies like Cargill, to his attempts to deal with trade. And he's got some opposition from industrialists such as auto and steel manufacturers who are worried about global supply chains. So his ability to use some of the levers of the trade war is somewhat limited. But his ability to invoke Taiwan as a lever seems to be pretty much without risk to the United States, at least in terms of domestic political considerations. The question that I would suggest is, does Taiwan really want to be used as a potential provocation in a U.S. China trade conflict? It seems to me that that may not be wise for Taiwan's future. Why do I say that? Well, there is reason to be concerned that Trump may not be a faithful friend. His attacks on long-standing allies, such as Canada and Germany, should give Taiwan concern. His comments about the future value and utility of NATO should give any of us concern. His questioning of the EU and his attempt to insert U.S. political interests into the midst of internal European Union controversies and debates should be a cause for concern. This photograph, taken from a G7 meeting with global leaders, probably says as much about how much of the world sees and trusts Trump as anything else that I could accompany with words. Trump has questioned the value of the nuclear shield over Japan and the Republic of Korea, even suggesting that perhaps it'd be a good idea if these countries would proliferate and be prepared to take a greater responsibility for their own defense. He beat President Moon of South Korea up to get him to sign a new trade agreement, and then after President Moon had made a public declaration that his government had agreed to the agreement, Trump backed away and said, well, wait, the U.S. isn't really ready to sign it yet, thinking that he might need those levers in negotiations with the DPRK or China. He gave no advance notice to the South Koreans or to the Japanese, or frankly to his own Pentagon, when he agreed in a meeting with Kim Jong-un to cancel planned military exercises, even going so far as to refer to them as war games, a term that his own military and State Department was most unhappy about, since we have long denied that we were just engaging in games or posturing, and had defended those exercises as critical to mission capability as those military forces learned to operate together. So what risks exist for Taiwan, who potentially finds itself caught between two leaders who may be most willing to use patriotic nationalism to distract from their own domestic political concerns and anxieties? Two strongmen who admire authoritarian leadership and who dare not appear weak, because to appear weak would reveal their own vulnerability to publics increasingly unsettled by political changes and events at home. Other pressures are almost certainly going to weigh heavily. Think about them for a moment. For President Trump, of course, there are the impending November midterm elections, and the awareness that if the Republicans lose control of the House, the whole ship may go down for President Trump, because a Democratic majority in the House will likely bring, or at least begin to debate and hold hearings on impeaching him. And even if they don't have the votes for conviction, and I think it's highly unlikely unless events change very rapidly from what we've seen thus far, that they could ever convince Republicans to actually remove him from office. But they could almost completely control the media count and the direction of coverage and understanding of the effectiveness and legacy of this administration and of the Republican Party going forward, just with the loss of those elections. The impact of the trade war on Trump's heartland voters has many Republicans in Iowa and Indiana, Illinois, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota very much concerned. And so I think that's weighing heavily on him. Of course, the Russia investigation and the fact that that investigation is not only ongoing, but now as part of that investigation, this morning they announced that they had given immunity to the CFO for the Trump organization to open up all the financial files. And yesterday it was protection for Mr. Pecker, and Mr. Pecker is said to have a safe full of dirty laundry that he's been keeping hidden. How much of it involves Trump, we are yet to see. The investigation of campaign violations by Michael Cohen. The urgent need to show some progress on the DPRK. A political base that Trump has stirred up that is intensely nationalistic and doesn't want to be weak, but will be increasingly restive and defensive. Putin, who's eager to sow discord around the world wherever he can. And of course, an unfolding conflict in the South China Sea, where even U.S. military leadership is very anxious about Chinese advances and are putting continuing pressure to maintain naval operations particularly, but also Air Force operations over those disputed territories. If Trump's got a problem on his plate, think about Xi. There may be no issue more important to Xi's survivability than what happens with Taiwan. I never have met a person, no matter how liberal they may be in China, who won't tell you that Taiwan is certainly part of China. The cost of the trade war that Trump has put upon China in devalued currency and increased prices may increasingly put pressure on the sustainability of the Chinese economy in the face of a slowing economy and an impending debt crisis. A perception that at least is playing out in Western media, if not in actual Chinese conversation, that perhaps Mr. Xi has overreached and that he's gone too far and is now facing for the first time in his administration some internal political pressure that he's gone too far to be so bold and so aggressive and so confrontational with other countries. A vulnerability, if he appears weak, created by the fact that his anti-corruption stances have made him many enemies among other factions within China. And of course, that same South China Sea conflict, where the possibility of just an accidental engagement between the two navies could quickly escalate out of control. So this is a very dangerous time. Trump is, as we know, mercurial and uninformed. He does not read briefing papers and is said to be inattentive when briefed. People who briefed him say he gets up and changes the TV channel in the middle of a briefing by experts. He is a heavy consumer of Fox News, which is right-wing slanted news. Yesterday, by the way, he tweeted out a message about the genocide against white farmers in South Africa. There is no such genocide, as near as any experts can tell, but it was a prominent story on Tucker Carlson's Fox News segment, and it seemed to capture the president's attention. Some in the U.S. military and intelligence communities are profoundly anxious about the president's leadership style and lack of attention. And I have personal evidence to support that claim. And the U.S. public is more polarized than ever before. Those who are with Trump are more solidly with him than ever, but that's 42% of the American electorate. Many others are as solidly against him, and there's an independent set of voters that are more likely than not hostile to Trump. The danger I see for Taiwan is that it ties itself too closely to Trump personally, and it could lose its support with other elements of the American democratic system. We already see some evidence that that's happened with Israel, which became too closely allied with the Republicans and has actually lost support in public opinion polls and in statements by Democratic and liberal congressmen that Israel no longer is acting in the way that it necessarily presents itself as an American ally. So I think one must remember, in Cold War times, American foreign policy was really united, and there was very little space between the Republicans and the Democrats on foreign policy questions. But I don't think that's the case now. And I fear that Mr. Xi's use of the Trump card of force may be an outcome that no one in the world really wants to see happen. Thank you very much.